Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining us at www.sonic-cinema.com as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. You can also check out the podcast at Apple, Google, Spotify, Good Pods, pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. And the Sonic Cinema YouTube channel, though, it also has interviews as well as quick take reviews of select movies. That is the Sonic Cinema Podcast on YouTube, but you can always listen wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There you can get older new watch reviews, just brief little write-ups of older movies that I watched for the first time. Can get early access to movie reviews that are going to be on this site, as well as a new series called Leaving the Collection, where I look at a movie from my DVD collection and that I kind of feel like has run its course in my collection, whether it's something that I don't really watch anymore or it's just something I'm not really interested in having in my collection anymore. And I give it one spin and I talk about it, and that is at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. So this October, we have had a terrific lineup, if I do say so myself, of guests and horror movies to talk about. And, you know, it wouldn't, but I will say it would not be October and discussing horror without Phil Fasso. We talked earlier about the Netflix Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We also went to almost real-life horrors, if you think about with Italian neorealism. Here, though, we are going back 40 years to discuss the horror of 1982, with three movies in particular that are actually pretty damn good. Phil, thank you as always for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Brian. It was a pleasure to be around.
So, I'll admit I was a bit young to see horror in 1982. I would have been about 4 or 5 when some of these movies came out. So, but what was it like as a horror fan in 1982 to watch these movies to start out?
So I was 10 years old when 1982 rolled around, summer of 82. And I remember seeing commercials for The Thing and being terrified. I went to see Poltergeist. I'm pretty sure my mom took us. Creepshow, I don't remember when I saw, but the whole thing was, I remember seeing It's funny because I used to be a huge fan of the Friday. I might have told you this story before. I used to be a huge fan of the Friday the 13th movies. So we'd go over to my aunt's house, and I had a couple older cousins, so they would be watching them on cable, and I'd be terrified hiding behind the couch. And then we'd come back. It's a half an hour, 40-minute trip to my parents' house. And then we had this huge 2 acres of woods behind the house. And I was always terrified at the prospect that Jason was going to come out of the woods and get me. So that shaded a lot of my horror experience. Again, that was the time when you had Showtime and HBO, and you had all kinds of midnight movies, stuff like that running at night. So I remember specifically with The Thing because my mom, I don't know why she hooked on to that movie so much. It came on cable, so it didn't do very well when it came out. And then it came on cable, I'm going to say probably sometime in 83. I don't remember exactly what the release window for cable was, but she watched it one time, and then we watched it with her, and I was terrified, amazed, in wonder. I found it glorious and all those things. And then, every time it came on, my mom would watch it. So there was one time when it was like 2 in the morning, and it was a school night. And I woke up, and I walked down, bleary-eyed, and wiped my eyes, in my pajamas and all that, and I walk into my living room, and my mother's on the couch at 2 in the morning watching The Thing. So I have some very interesting memories about that one. The scene in 82, because I was only 10 at the time, it's not, I can't really tell you what it was for older people except for my cousins, because my cousins were always going to horror movies. But horror back then was a big thing. You know, you had the slasher boom a couple of years in at that point. And as you're going to see from just the 3 movies today we discussed, there was a whole I think we discussed this in one of the other years where we discussed maybe 97. Horror is all over the board at this time.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff going on. And then Poltergeist was interesting because Poltergeist it's a horror movie. It's a PG horror movie, which normally is a detriment, but not in this case. And, you know, horror. So it's interesting because Poltergeist was just a huge movie. And everyone was seeing it, you know, and it was like you could talk to your neighbors, you could talk to the kids at school because everybody saw it and knew about it. So, yeah, the scene at 82, I mean, we're going to talk about some very good flicks. Not like Pieces or any of that stuff. Yeah, the horror is all over the board, but you get some really high-end stuff here, especially the 3 flicks that we're going to talk about today.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think of the horror movies from 82 that I've watched, these 3 are by far the cream of the crop. I mean, you know, I was, you know, a few years in like 86, 87 is when I had my Friday 13th phase, and I saw the first 6 of those. So naturally, part 3 was part of that. I wasn't necessarily aware of the 3D origins at the time because of the fact that, I mean, you know, 3D home media wasn't a thing at the time. And then, but I also, you know, it's funny catching up with movies over the past 20 years, especially like horror movies, as far as, you know, ranking them from Netflix or stuff like that. It's, you know, listening, especially with this year, listening to 80s All Over when they were talking about the early part of the slasher boom, you really don't know, it's really hard to kind of get your head around, if you didn't necessarily live through it, just how much the influence of Halloween and Friday 13th had on the landscape of horror at that point. And I mean, you have the 3 films we're going to talk about almost feel like anomalies, really, in terms of what they're doing with horror and how they approach horror.
Sure, and you know what? It's very interesting because today we're going to talk about a remake of a 50s flick, and this one involves aliens, an alien force that basically absorbs people from the shred and replicates them. We're going to talk about basically an 80s version of what would be a traditional ghost story.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about an anthology, which is a lot of fun. So
yeah.
I like this. I like the films that we chose here because we're getting a melange of a bunch of different things here in 3 different styles of film, 3 different directors, and 3 different great directors, I should say.
Oh, absolutely.
Although, you know, outside of a couple of films, you may be debatable on Tobe Hooper's greatness, but certainly a master of horror there. So that should be fun.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, this is. It's funny because of the fact that this is going to be the first time, really, any of these directors are going to be discussed in any degree of length on the podcast. Like we haven't really gotten to these filmmakers yet. I mean, they've been mentioned in passing, but ultimately speaking, this is kind of their breakout as far as talking about them on the podcast. I mean, we've talked about each of these movies before. I mean, I know the episode before this, you know, we brought up The Thing was brought up and Creepshow was brought up as well, but I mean, you know, not in as deep a way as what we're going to be talking about. So let us go ahead and get started with these 3. We're going to start with John Carpenter's The Thing, which came out in June of 1982, it came out around 3 weeks after Poltergeist and 2 weeks after E.T. I think that is definitely an important context to put its release in, because it really gives you a good idea as to why, a big part of the reason why this movie was not a success at the box office.
Well, here's the thing, okay? I should say, here's the thing that's funny. On because I bought the DVD. I bought a DVD player in 2000, my very first DVD player, and this was, I think, like second or third DVD I picked up. And I was all about ripping into all the extras in that. And Dean Cundy, the director of photography, the DP, specifically says, "Hey, you know what? A couple weeks earlier, a much kinder, gentler alien came around."
Yeah,
And he thought that ET was a big part of the reason that people chose to go see stuff that was going to be with a happy alien, as opposed to the alien eating people and replicating.
mm-hmm.
I can see that definitely, but I also like. So it's weird because the thing all of a sudden is like everyone's talking about the thing 40 years later like it's a great movie. Now, I'd like to brag about being way ahead of the curve, and I think all these people are posers, and screw them. To be honest, I always thought the thing was a great film, but again, it's about as hardcore into the ultra violence as you could get with a movie at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, it is graphic beyond belief.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a Friday the 13th movie, it's people are going to get stabbed, people are going to get hung, arrows, pitchforks, whatever. You go to the thing, and it's a whole different experience from anything you've ever seen before, and it's so graphic. Now, Rob Bottin should be blessed for putting together basically the greatest special effects in any horror movie ever. So let's grant him that. But this is not an easy sell, even if you're not matching it up against E.T.,
Oh no, you're absolutely right. And yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and say that Rob Bottin. I would agree with you and say this is probably the greatest effects a horror movie has had, and it is so. And I think a big part of it is because of how radically different it is from what we typically consider special effects and makeup effects in horror. Because, I mean, yeah, you look at, Friday the 13th Part 3 is traditionally violent in the same way those slasher movies were violent at the time, but it's nothing compared to what we're seeing, which is basically biology just twisting itself into different shapes, and it really takes the idea of what we kind of see in Ridley Scott's Alien, as far as you're not quite sure of what this creature is. You don't get a clear sense of this creature. And even in The Thing, you don't see a definitive look of what like the thing would normally look like. You just see it within the context of the things that it inhabits. And that's a big part of what is so deeply unsettling in this movie.
Well, the scary part is the paranoia. The thing could be anyone and anything on that camp.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to tell. I mean, they come up with a blood test, which is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, and Carpenter said on that DVD that I bought that, he didn't want a guy in a rubber suit.
Mm-hmm.
He sounds like he liked Alien, but he said, again, Alien was great, but Alien was one more time a guy in a rubber suit, and he didn't want that. So we hired Bottin with this concept that, hey, the thing can be anything, not just from Earth, but anything from all these different planets that it's traveled. And it goes around. And it's just it's so grotesque and so frightening at the same time. But it's really like the fact that when the thing isn't even on the screen, when you don't have monster gross outs, that it's still just this engaging, adrenaline rush, because you don't know who the thing is. You don't know who to trust. You don't know who you can stay with, and nobody should be left alone with anybody else. It's just like, it's crazy. It's a paranoid's wet dream, pretty much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's the fact that this film. Well, okay. First of all, I have to say it's kind of interesting that I find it like interesting that Predator basically ripped off the exact same opening shot that the thing has, which is basically you see this.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You see the spaceship. in space, and then you see it landing in laying on Earth and stuff like that from space, and it's like that is exactly the same thing you see in Aliens, in Predator, the first scene.
The first time I ever saw Predator, the first thing I thought was, "Oh my God, they just did the opening from the thing."
But I think the fact that this movie starting off with, and I mean, I messaged you when I was rewatching it for this episode, like one of the first things we see in this movie is a helicopter that is shooting at a dog. You don't know why they're shooting at the dog. You obviously can have your own ideas, but why are they shooting at the dog? And then the dog comes up to the camp where Kurt Russell and everybody is at, and they welcome it, but like the helicopter, the team in the helicopter is still shooting at it. So they are shooting at Kurt Russell's team. So that right there, it starts introducing the whole idea of distrust among humans and lack of communication that I think is going to ultimately be the downfall of these characters in this movie.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it doesn't really make any overt political statements, but the whole thing is like, okay, so the 50s one was, the original, the thing from another planet was, I think it came out in the 50s.
Yeah, it was 51.
You had the Cold War paranoia there. But here, it's just the whole thing. It picks up on that element of it that, hey, you can't trust your neighbor. You can't trust your best friend. You can't trust anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Which, fits into horror rather well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. And the whole thing is that the seeds of distrust, if these guys had banded together and stayed in the same room and not split up and not worried about anything else, and if they just stood together, but eventually the thing's going to have to reveal itself, right?
Yeah.
But they don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't trust each other. Some of them don't like each other. I mean, I think it's 12 guys. When you have 12 men in a camp, thousands of miles off from anywhere, you're going to have alliances. You're going to have people. That's just human nature. You're going to have people who don't like each other. You're going to have alliances. You're going to have people who are casual with each other, and the thing blows all that up.
Yeah. No, and I think the thing that is the thing that is so effective about this film, and in particular the screenplay by Bill Lancaster, who's adapting this story, is the fact that we get to understand all of the characters. We come to understand who all of these characters are just in little moments, in the ways they interact with each other and things. Richard Macer and his care for the dog, so it's natural for him that he's going to have he's going to respect them as a form of life. And then even when the thing gets into the kennel, it's still he's still thinking of the dogs first.
Yes, he's associated with the dogs. He's like the loner, and he spends times with the animals instead of with the rest of the crew there. But then you find out that dog that came from the Norwegian camp has been wandering around the camp all day. So that lays the seeds. I mean, it's just the way it's structured is brilliant. And Lancaster did a great job with the script, because there were all sorts of questions about who's available when and who's not here, and all those sorts of things where it keeps you on your toes,
Yeah. Well, and it also, in addition to having following the dog going through the camp is so important because of the fact that it sets up the geography of where these people are, and really just sets up just how isolated from everything they are. And the fact that it's like, if they're going to survive this, they ultimately have to try to trust each other, but you see how they're not going to be able to either. And it's understandable because of the fact that, at a certain point, you're not going to be able to trust anybody without thinking about the fact that, well, what is that person's motivation in doing this? What is this person's motivation in doing that? You just need to, there's a certain amount of trust that you have to put somebody in. I mean, even if you were taking out most of the horror of this film, it is still a terrific thriller about trust and about people put into an extreme situation who are inevitably going to get on each other's nerves to the point where I don't know if I can trust this person anymore.
Well, I mean, that's why Fuchs dies. Fuchs is totally, once Blair goes crazy, Fuchs is totally locking down on how to put a plan together. And then he comes across underwear that he thinks is McCready's, and it looks like it's burnt up, and he thinks McCready's been assimilated. And then they leave it open, but I've always taken it that he took the flare and burnt himself. He didn't want to be caught up in anything like that, didn't want to be assimilated. And I can't blame the guy at that point. But there's so much going on, It's just like, and Carpenter keeps the wheels turning and everything moving brilliantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, and then the scenes that are the highlights. So you have the dog kennel scene is insane. So you build up to, I guess it's probably about 25, 30 minutes in, I would think. Like, you've already established a bunch of stuff at that point. So, Richard Massur's character there goes to the kennel, and he's going to put the dog away, and then he hears something in, and you see a little bit in the shadows, but you can't really tell what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then he hits the fire alarm, and everybody comes out. Richard Massur has one of the best lines in the movie. Somebody asks him what's in there, and he says, "I don't know, but it's weird and pissed off, whatever it is." And then you just get spectacle when you see the thing. So this dog opens up, and it spreads out these giant crab legs, but its head falls off, and it splits open, and that becomes this other dog thing.
Yeah.
And it starts shooting out. I feel so bad for the dogs in that scene because it's roping them up and it's shooting fluids at them, and you can tell they're all in a lot of pain while it's going on. It's going to take over all those dogs, and that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because later on, when you get to the scene where Blair's trying to figure out with his stopwatch and his 1982 computer how long this is going to take, basically within 1,000 days, if this thing gets out, it's going to assimilate the entire world.
Yeah.
And that's going to move on to the next place, the next planet,
Mm-hmm.
So there are some very tense scenes in here. And then, like I mentioned, the blood test earlier, which is an absolutely brilliant way to find out who the thing is when you figure out, hey, this thing is a bunch of different parts. And the way that Carpenter directs it, where, it's so tense figuring out what's going on, but there's that misdirect where Childs is talking to him about how it's a bunch of voodoo bullshit, and he dips the thing in while he's in the middle of shining Childs again on him, and then the blood hops out. I jumped out of my freaking seat the first time I saw that. I leaped off the couch. I was like, whoa, what the? So, yeah, it's just, it's an exercise in paranoia. And then we can't go through any discussion about the thing without talking about John Carpenter's relationship with Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
Because Kurt Russell took the role. Carpenter asked him to take it, and he said, okay, well, I agreed to it thinking it was going to be an ensemble piece. And it is in some ways, but then, McCready starts to step out of the shadows, and he really becomes your main character, your focus here.
Mm-hmm.
So John Carpenter had directed him at that point in, I believe, Elvis was the first time they got together. And have you ever heard of the story why he hired him to play Elvis?
No.
So some guy who was the casting director or whatever said, hey, listen, I got two guys here. I got a guy who looks exactly like Elvis to a T, but he doesn't sound like him. doesn't look like, he doesn't sound like him, can't sing like him, whatever. And I got this other guy who doesn't look like Elvis at all, but once you're in the room with him and he starts talking, you're going to think you have Elvis Presley in front of you. And that guy was Kurt Russell. So he started with him in Elvis, and then the next flick he did was Escape from New York, which came out. It's hard to believe that Escape from New York came out just a year before this. Like that, they crunched a lot. Guys like Carpenter used to make a movie a year. I can't imagine that happening nowadays. With production schedules is wrong, gaps between films and all.
Yeah, well, and think about the run that Carpenter had. So he had Halloween in 78. You had Elvis in 79. You had The Fog in 1980. Escape from New York in 81. The Thing in 1982. Christine in 1983. Right? And then Starman 84.
That's a hell of a run.
Yeah. That is a ridiculous run for a filmmaker. And then a couple of years later, he had Big Trouble in Little China with Kurt Russell. Then he had Prince of Darkness. They had They Live. And, well, wait a minute. What year? Okay, what year was this?
I know that They Live is 88. I think Prince of Darkness is 87.
Yeah. But no, I mean, that's
almost a decade without having a year off, pretty much.
Basically.
It was always a John Carpenter movie.
Well, when you think about, especially stuff like Escape from New York and The Thing, you think about how technically complex these movies are in terms of the sets, in terms of the visual effects, in terms of all of that. I mean, those are not small productions to put on. It's like it makes
not. And the thing took, I think, over a year to put together.
Yeah.
From the time he got hired till the time it was done. And he was working, Rob Bottin was working 7 days a week for like a year. And then there's a part where Stan Winston does a hand puppet for the dog. Mm-hmm. Like it's the only effect in the movie that's not Rob Bottin. And I'm pretty sure that's the point where Rob Bottin basically had a nervous breakdown. He had to be away for 2 weeks because he was working 7 days a week for a year. And you see that as an effects-laden film. That's not sitting at a computer for 12 hours. That's constructing stuff. That's being on the set all the time, He basically had a cot in Carpenter's office, I think, and pretty much he slept in Carpenter's office.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, those are not, like, Escape from New York is a very technical film. You have all kinds of special effects, not in the same way that they're in The Thing, but you have all kinds of special effects. You have digital effects that are simple for now, when you consider now. But back in the day, I mean, that was top-notch stuff he was putting on the screen,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, going back to the fact that like you have one moment where, it's a hand puppet that Stan Winston does, you couldn't tell that goes from one visual effects artist to another. It is so effortless. They both feel part of the same universe.
Yeah, they're organic.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is so... I think that's one of the things that's so incredible. And and the thing is, one of the things I love about this movie, and one of the things I really appreciated rewatching it this time especially, was, yes, you could do these effects so much easier now than you could back in 1982. They would not be as good. They would not be as good because of the fact that the thing I love is when you have the body on the table, and they are trying to do the autopsy, and you see the head pull off, and it's like you can tell that it's makeup, you can tell that it's makeup effects, you can tell it's practical effects. Yeah, you could do that CGI. It wouldn't have that tactile feel that the effects in this movie has.
Okay, all you need to do to prove that statement to yourself is watch the 2011 prequel to The Thing,
mm-hmm.
where I forget which shop did it. One shop went and did a whole bunch of visual effects, and then they said, nope, no one's going to buy this, so we're going to CGI over all of it. And it's terrible. It's garbage.
Yeah.
No one is going to use that trash with what Rob Bottin did in 82. No one.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a whole different world. I mean, I'm an old school guy, so I'm not really into, like, visual effects for backgrounds and stuff. That's fine. Like, you can fill in, you know, I can go outside my parking lot, throw up a green screen, and make it look like my parking lot's a forest. That's kind of cool. When you come into visual effects of monsters and stuff, I mean, I'm very old school. I'll take practical rubber stuff and masks and KY jelly over anything that you're going to do on a computer, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, look, the fact of the matter is you're still capable of doing great makeup effects, but chances are nobody, but, you know, as with that 2011 movie, nobody is going to say, oh, yeah, these should be done practically. Nobody's going to say that now. They're going to just say, okay, we can do it in the computer. And I'm sure they can do some really great stuff in the computer for it. It's not going to have the same feel. It really is not going to have the same feel. It's not going to have the same intensity that Bottin's work does here, which is just absolutely unforgettable once you see it.
I'll bring up Jurassic Park for a second. So everyone talks about, because Jurassic Park was the first real big movie that broke barriers with the whole CGI and digital effects. But you know what everyone seems not to talk about? Stan Winston built a full-size Tyrannosaurus for that movie.
Yeah.
So again, if you blend it in with the real stuff, you know, like Spielberg does a brilliant job of blending the two together.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have those actual, you know, giant-sized dinosaurs, I think you're looking at a different experience, even with Jurassic Park.
Oh yeah.
Now, both work is it's never been beaten, and I don't think it ever will. I can't foresee anyone coming up with the stuff that he did. It's just, and it's goopy and it's gory, but it's so technically brilliant. And it's gross to look at, but it's so much fun to look at, you know?
Well, and it's because, I think a huge part of it is because of the fact that this is a type of creature that we've never seen before. We've seen aliens before. Like, you know, again, look at Alien. Look at any degree of sci-fi movies that came out like before, including Star Wars, Close Encounters, and stuff like that. We've seen aliens before on screen. What we haven't seen is something that just hides itself, and then how does it reveal itself in a way that isn't just like, oh, this you know, sort of like the symbiote in Spider-Man 3 or Venom, where it's like it's just a glob of just a glob of goo that's skittering along the ground. This isn't the same thing. This is something that is lethal and just, it doesn't care about grossing you out. Its whole intention is to take you as part of its own, and that is what is so extraordinary about the effects here, is because of the fact that it's like, even though you don't see the alien in its original form, you understand this alien. You understand what this alien is and what it does.
And the thing is that the Norwegians didn't quite get it in time and figure it out.
Yeah.
So the Norwegians ended up getting screwed. And then, you know, so everyone wants to talk about the ending of this film because I've always loved horror movies with dark endings.
Yeah.
Right? 5 out of my 6 favorites ends with 5 out of my 6 favorite horror flicks end with dark endings. You know, and it goes to something that I've heard George Romero say this in a number of different interviews, that, hey, listen, in horror, there's no sense in knocking over the apple cart if you're going to set the apple cart upright at the end. You know? And I know everyone wants happiness, and American audiences are trained to like happy end. But you can't get much more bleak than the end of this.
No.
So you have Childs disappears for a while, and then the rest of the camp, the camp's pretty much on fire at this point.
Yeah.
And it's once those fires go out, this is going to go below freezing, and there's going to be all sorts of trouble. No one's going to be able to survive that, unless, of course, you're a thing. And the whole thing at the end is, hey, listen, is either one of these guys the thing? Now, I can't see Kurt Russell being the thing because we're following him the whole time.
Yeah.
I've heard theories that Kurt Russell gets infected. I'm like, I can't possibly see that because we followed him through every step. Like, we've never seen him get infected. Now, I'm of along the lines of Childs isn't the thing either, but I also like McCready's way of saying it at the end. He's like, hey, listen, I don't think either one of us is in shape to do anything about it if either one of us is. So let's just hang out for a while and see what happens.
No, this is a bleak ending, and it's like I have a feeling this, and it's like going back to E.T. It's like I'm sure that's another part of the reason why this was not what people wanted, and people wanted E.T. is because of the fact that this is ultimately a very dark ending because of the fact that exactly what you said, where it's like neither of them can necessarily trust that the other's not the thing. But at the same time, I like that, and I like the ambiguity that they don't necessarily know, and we don't necessarily know, and they're just going to, I don't know, are they going to wait for each other to die, or what is going on there?
I think that they're going to freeze to death. That's my personal opinion. I think that both of them are going to sit there. They're going to finish the bottle of, I think it's J&B that they're drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that once the fires go out, they're going to have about a half an hour to live, and then they're going to be frozen together. But, the thing is, looking on the bright side, they probably saved the world.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I have to mention the terrific soundtrack to this. Ennio Morricone was the main composer, although Carpenter certainly had some compositions in here as well.
I've always been a little confused by that because if you listen to I know Morricone is the listed composer, but if you listen to this, the heartbeat, the keyboards, everything, this sounds like a typical John Carpenter score. So I can't say I have a lot of experience with. Well, no, I can't say that either. Morricone, the first thing that pops into my mind is the Clint Eastwood stuff,
right?
Spaghetti
right,
stuff,
right.
Morricone, and I don't think that's an unpopular thing. I think a lot of people would think that when it came to Morricone. And then, I know he did Once Upon a Time in America. He was a very popular composer back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s.
Yeah.
So what's your take on this? Does this sound like a typical Morricone score? Or
I've heard enough of Morricone's other work to know that there's definitely the sound of Morricone in this. You can definitely tell that there's some of that traditional Morricone sounds, the way he builds orchestrations. You can definitely tell that that's part of it. Now, I will say it's you can also definitely tell that there's a lot of Carpenter in here as well. And I think that the end, it's funny because of the fact that I was reading up on it on Wikipedia, and basically, it's one of those cases where Carpenter went to Morricone because he wanted to have Morricone compose it. And it was probably fact of matter that he wanted to focus more on directing this time because of how complex things were.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And like we've already said, he was also probably doing post-production on Escape from New York for part of this too. So I mean that's probably part of it. But he gave Morricone some ideas. Morricone came up with some of his ideas, and then Carpenter also came up with some of his own ideas. And you basically, what we're hearing basically is a combination of the two. Because I watched Halloween 3 Season of the Witch for the first time this year, and one of the things that was so striking listening to that was how much of that score reminded me of The Thing. And it's because there were several beats that just remind me of music that I literally just heard in The Thing the day or two before.
Well, that's one of the things with Halloween and Halloween 2. Neither one of those movies is directed by Carpenter, but because his score is there, you can't not think Carpenter when you see those films, you know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And no, I mean, I think it's a beautiful score. It's like, yeah, there are definitely some there's definitely some great music from both of them. I think it does what it wants to do, which is it emphasizes the slow burn, but also when it reaches those muted crescendos, it's just absolutely chilling.
Look, we've talked about this before a number of times, especially because you're a music guy, that anytime you take a great movie and you add a great score, it can only enhance it. Yeah. And this is a perfect example of that. The heartbeat thing that they came up with, because it plays at the beginning and then it plays over the end credits all the way through, is just an amazing. It's so simple, but it's so effective.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's just next level stuff. So I go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's funny because of the fact that, I mean, Kubrick did kind of the same thing when he was adapting some of the music, when he was mixing together some of the music for The Shining. He put that same type of heartbeat into some of the music in The Shining, especially when Jack or Danny or Halloran are shining in the film. That's kind of the moments where that heartbeat kind of comes into play on top of the existing classical music they uses. And I mean, when used correctly, that type of thing is just so absolutely effective. And I mean, obviously in both of those cases, it helps when you have a great director like Kubrick or Carpenter who is capable of building tension visually as well and understands that the ways that sound can be used or not used to build tension is an important part of the process.
And I think that thing is also very good. Like sometimes directors definitely overuse a score. A really great director, especially in like a thriller or a horror movie, knows when not to have any score at all. And there's a bunch of places in here where you don't hear the music, and it just adds to it. Because when the music comes, the variation between music and no music just enhances everything. So.
Yeah, and my guest Becky O'Brien, when we were talking about horror scores a couple episodes ago, we were talking about Halloween and we were talking about Carpenter. And, the thing that's interesting about Carpenter is that and one of the things that I love about Carpenter as a filmmaker, what I've come to love about him as a filmmaker, as I've started to really dig into his work, is the fact that, yes, I mean, he is, to a certain extent, you can sort of, you could see very much a bit of ego and like, oh, I'm going to write the music myself. The fact of the matter is, John Carpenter's almost as important a figure in film music history as he is in film history as a director. And I think that's one of the things that is so remarkable about him. And one of the things we talked about in that episode when we were talking about Halloween is that, when he does go, we certainly hope that he gets the due credit he deserves as one of the great film composers of all time, as well as one of the great filmmakers.
Sure, I'm totally down with you on that. Totally agree.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to say about The Thing before we move on?
No, we can move on.
All
I'm
right.
just going to say one more time that I saw it in 1982 for the first time. I watched it, the last time I watched it was a couple months ago. And again, the best horror movies are the ones that will affect you just like they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the thing is right in that category, right in that wheelhouse for me.
Yeah, this is one that I've come to absolutely love. I mean, I didn't dislike it the first time I saw it. I just wasn't quite sure what I thought about it. But as I've watched it more over the years, it is one that I've come to love and think is just genuinely one of the great films. So
When you know everything that's going to happen in a movie that you saw for the first time 40 years ago, and the hair is still standing on your arms and your spine is still tingling, that's a quality horror film, right?
yeah. So our next film also came out in the June of 1982. We've already talked about the fact that it came out a few weeks before The Thing, which actually I want to say, in addition to The Thing, Blade Runner came out the exact same day, which is just mind-boggling in its own right. That those two
Another
movies came
movie
out at
that
the
was
same time.
unsuccessful. Another movie that was unsuccessful when it came out and now is considered a classic.
Yeah. June 1982 was absolutely loaded because it started in terms of horror with Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist. And before we get into this discussion, I would like to read two quotes. Regrettably, some of the press has misunderstood the rather unique creative relationship which you and I shared through the making of Poltergeist. I enjoyed your openness in allowing me, as writer and producer, a wide berth for creative involvement, just as I know you were happy with the freedom you had to direct Poltergeist so wonderfully. Through the screenplay, you accepted a vision of this very intense movie from the start, and as the director, you delivered the goods. You performed responsibly and professionally throughout, and I wish you great success on your next project. That was, of course, written by Steven Spielberg. It was an open letter printed in the Hollywood Reporter. It was printed the week before the movie because a lot of people questioned how much, in fact, Tobe Hooper directed the film. Now, the next quote that I'd like to bring up is from a great horror director in his own right, Mick Garris, who was a publicist on Poltergeist. Tobe was always calling action and cut. Tobe had been deeply involved in all of the pre-production and everything. But Steven is a guy who will come in and call the shots. And so you're on your first studio film, hired by Steven Spielberg, who is enthusiastically involved in this movie. Are you going to say, stop that, let me do this? Which Tobe did. Tobe was a terrific filmmaker. I don't think it's that Steven was controlling. I think it was Steven was enthusiastic. And nobody was there to protect Tobe, but all of the pre-production was done by Tobe. Tobe was there throughout. Tobe's vision is very much realized there. And Tobe got credit because he deserved credit, including Steven Spielberg said that. Yes, Steven Spielberg was very much involved. It is a Tobe Hooper film. I wanted to quote both of these things out of the way first because I know you and I both never have really accepted the bullshit that, oh, maybe Steven Spielberg directed this and Tobe Hooper didn't direct this. Tobe Hooper directed this film.
Okay, so we've established on this podcast that we are both tremendous fans of Richard Donner.
Yes.
Okay. Richard Donner I think we both agree that Richard Donner directed The Goonies, right?
Yes.
I think we'd also both say realistically that there are Steven Spielberg touches in that film, even with Richard Donner as a established director who had directed, Superman by that point, that there were touches where you could see Steven Spielberg's fingerprints on that as a producer, right?
150%.
No one ever argues that Steven Spielberg directed The Goonies.
No.
No one ever says that. I've never heard anybody make that claim. I've never seen it in print. I've never seen an interview where Richard Donner said he interfered. I've never seen Spielberg say that was my movie, not Donner's, because it's not. Okay? This one gets a lot of that, and I'm sure I know exactly why. Because Tobe Hooper at this point was known for a couple of things, basically, and he's still, Tobe Hooper's known for a few big things in his career. And the thing that he was known for, probably even more than this, obviously would be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes.
If you look at that and you look at the Poltergeist film, obviously there are huge differences in aesthetic quality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I wouldn't argue that. Now, Poltergeist is at times visceral. It can be mean. There's a lot of stuff going on there. But you could tell it's a very well-made, very polished studio film, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at Texas Chainsaw was basically an indie film.
Yeah.
Made cheap by a bunch of guys in Texas, using all sorts of every corner cutting you could possibly think that an indie director, an indie producer would use, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that people see that, and if they'd seen Eaten Alive at that point, you step to this and you say, well, there's no way that Tobe Hooper could have directed this thing.
Right.
He doesn't. First off, Spielberg's going to overrun him, and second off, he's just not capable. But people seem to forget that if you watch Salem's Lot, which was made in '79, that was his first real foray. It was a TV movie, but that was the first time he wasn't doing anything indie, I guess. Pretty much.
Yeah.
You look at that, that's a very competently made film with sets and, all kinds of, it's polished, it's nice looking, it cuts nicely from scene to scene. It's not a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I think that Hooper was definitely a victim of circumstance here. And I don't want to hear the argument that Steven Spielberg, especially because Steven Spielberg was directing E.T. at the time.
Yeah, and he was contractually
that into account either. It wasn't like he was jumping from. It was like he was going on his weekends off ET and making a separate great film at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's like part of the. I feel like part of the reason this question will continue to come up with Poltergeist is because of the fact that it feels like everything you see, one of the pieces of trivia you always see about Poltergeist is the fact that Steven Spielberg was contractually obligated not to direct anything else while he was making E.T. So therefore, he couldn't do Poltergeist. Oh, well, maybe that means he circumvented that because of the fact that he, worked as a de facto director and just basically had Tobe Hooper cover for him, which is bullshit. I mean, it's completely absurd. And the fact of the matter is, this is Spielberg's first time out this is really Spielberg's first time out as a producer. This was his first film where he was producing somebody else. Do you really think it's a wise decision if you're trying to set yourself up as a producer where you're going to give people carte blanche to make the movies that they want? Is it in your best interest to run all over them?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I think that Steven Spielberg had been in the industry long enough at that point to know that as a director.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, I just look, I remember watching something on, I think it was the E! Network years and years ago. It was I saw it. I might have. I'm pretty sure it was on the E! Network, and I heard that one of the things that happened was, and I don't remember. Somebody on the cast of crew said this, that basically Tobe Hooper. So there's the scene where the steak. There's a steak. The guy grabs a steak. One of the paranormal guys grabs a steak out of the fridge.
Yeah.
And he puts it on the counter, and then all these maggots crawl out. And he drops the chicken wing, and then the steak just gets overcome, and it turns into this big monstrous thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Whoever told, and I wish I could remember who told the story, but I don't. but the person said that Hooper went through the setup, Hooper directed it, Hooper was filming it, and Steven Spielberg came in and looked at it, and he said, "This is awful. You need to do this again." Right? So as a director at that point, and as a first-time producer, who put out a number of quality films on his own, obviously he's going to want to put out the best project. His name's on the line,
Yeah.
Is that Steven Spielberg directing the film? No, that's Steven Spielberg saying what a producer would probably say. Hey, we need to redo this. This isn't what it needs to be. It's not going to fit in well with the rest of the film. We need to up our game here and do this again. Now, does that mean Spielberg directed that scene? No.
No.
It's controversy for the sake of controversy, and I understand that some people love to dig into this. I've seen people go both ways on it. I've seen people say, hey, it was all Spielberg. I've said Spielberg directed half of it, Spielberg directed 60%, whatever. I don't think that Spielberg directed any of it.
No.
I mean, he's directed scenes in some of George Lucas's films, and they're very open about that every time that happens. And George Lucas has directed a scene or two here in one of Spielberg's films. So, I mean, the whole thing is just controversy. It's like 40 years out now. It's like, give me a break. It's a great movie. Give Hooper the credit he deserves, even if you don't like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Is Steven Spielberg's DNA there? Of course. Did anybody say a word about this same thing with Richard Donner and Goonies? Absolutely not.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll leave it at that. So.
Oh, yeah. We'll get on to the film from here. I mean, look, this is a script that started with Spielberg. Like, he and Stephen King wanted to do a modern haunted house. Now, King eventually dropped out, but the writers came on. Michael Grace and Mark Victor came on, and with Spielberg, I mean, this is the same thing with Goonies, where it's like, this story is from Spielberg. He had this idea, and I mean, it could be part of this is because of the fact that this is one of the few writing credits that Spielberg has in his career. And so that's part of where it comes from too. But the thing is, yes, there is a lot that is Spielberg in here. I will say, rewatching it yesterday, the scare moments in this film are as intense as anything we see in Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Sure. And it's like, okay, so Steven Spielberg sees The Howling, right? Steven Spielberg sees The Howling, and that's why he hires Dee Wallace to play the mom in E.T.
Yeah.
He then hires Joe Dante to direct Gremlins, right? Mm-hmm. Gremlins is another one, and I've heard Joe Dante said that Steven Spielberg considers Joe Dante to be the dark side of Steven Spielberg,
Yeah.
But again, if you look at Gremlins, like that whole town set up with the village and all that, that's right out of a Steven Spielberg movie.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. It's like the Poltergeist movie with, Mogwais running around.
Yeah, and that's and that's another thing where it's like you'd never hear, oh, well, maybe Spielberg directed that instead of Joe Dante.
No one ever says that. And I think that Tobe Hooper was just a victim of circumstance here. I mean, I don't think even 40 years later people discuss this, and I'm like, hey, just give the guy the credit he deserves.
Yeah.
You're not saying this about Donner or Dante with those films. And let's face it, at this point, I would say that not only is Poltergeist an established classic, but Goonies and Gremlins are established 80s classics,
Oh, absolutely they are. I mean, Poltergeist is probably one of the best major studio-produced horror films of the past half century. I mean, it really is. I think it's just legitimately great because of the way that it builds up this situation that the Freelings find themselves in, and the fact that you have moments of fun, you have moments of tiny terrors like Robbie getting scared of, the lightning and thunder and all of that stuff, and the way that his dad, played by Craig T. Nelson, the way he the way he's like, okay, well, here's how you know it's getting further and further away from you, and it's like you build that into things. Then you have Carol Ann, who's terrific in this. Who the actress Heather Work is terrific in this film. You have her being the creepy kid in the requisite creepy kid in this movie. But at the same time, it's like when she disappears, you feel that because of how well the family is established. And these are terrific performances in this movie.
Everybody's great in this movie. And the thing is that I'm going to totally agree with you. The reason this movie is so effective is because they spend time establishing the family.
Yeah.
And you know what? You have two parents. They're your 80s, typical 80s fucking upper middle class parents. Live in a nice home, 3 kids, They got a teenager and 2 younger kids, They're smoking pot in the bedroom and about to have, some fun.
Yeah.
And it's like that's your typical 80s parents. And you could tell the thing that separates this from so many other movies, even ones that revolve around family, is that the Freelings feel like a real family. They feel legitimately like the next door neighbors that you would love to have, the nice people, and they generally, they come across as real people. And I think that's a testament to Spielberg's script, and that's definitely a testament to all 5 of the actors. And by the time that things start to go south and get a little weird, I don't want anything to happen. I don't want to see them die.
No.
I don't want to, because in your typical horror movie, you're going to have corpses. You're going to have people dying at some point. I don't want to see any people die. I like them.
And the fact that this is a PG-rated horror movie, first of all, blows my mind. I feel like they had to bribe the MPAA to get this away from an R, but I think the big part of the reason for that is that nobody dies in this movie. And that is remarkable.
That is amazing. Because you never think that could happen in a horror movie. Most times people are crying when there's a low body count. Oh man, only 2 people died, blah, blah, blah. I will take a horror movie that's terrifying like this with legitimate people that I love as the cast against, 12, 13, 20, whatever, against Halloween Kills where 407 people get killed in a 3-hour time span,
Yeah.
I will take this because you have a legitimate. It's just, the thing is that, yes, okay, so the MPAA back then was leaning toward creating the PG-13, which, let's face it, I had been made a couple years ago. This would have been at least a PG-13. Right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They didn't have the PG-13. I'm sure that part of it was they didn't want to slap an R on a Spielberg movie that was going to be a summer release. Was wrong. Was Jaws R or was Jaws a PG-13? A PG, rather.
No, that would have been a PG movie because that was decade before this. That was like 7 years before this. So it would have been PG-13 here. It would have been PG-13 now. But yeah, it was a PG movie at the time.
So I think that because it's Spielberg, they were probably able to get away with a lot more. But also, this is not a movie that really relies. There's a couple scenes that are pretty, like the scene with the steak I was talking about. And then I think the most horrifying part is the guy having the ghost of obviously got home and he sees the steak and then he starts peeling his face off, which is just disgusting.
Yeah, I forgot that scene in this movie.
But it's not really one of those that is based on gore, and there are some effects here that are really, really good. Mm-hmm. And again, I think that it's more creepy than it is. Well, it's definitely more creepy than it is gory.
Yeah,
you get some skeletons in the pool at the end that are kind of gross.
Well, yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's like with the exception of that scene in the mirror, this movie really doesn't trade in violence. Like really, even when the scary stuff is happening, you don't see, there's not a whole lot of people being thrown around or, having to bandage up cuts and stuff like that after the horror happens. I mean, it's so much of it is supernatural. So much of it is showing you something that is going to creep you the hell out. And this is a very different movie from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's very much a movie from the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre because of the fact that what makes Texas Chainsaw Massacre so effective is just how blunt force intense each of those moments with Leatherface is. And the fact that, and whether you're talking about the sound design, whether you're talking about the cinematography, whether you're talking about the actions, you see that in the set pieces in Poltergeist. And that's where the whole idea of that controversy is absurd because of the fact that it's like, this is Tobe Hooper. This is a Tobe Hooper movie. I mean, even if you look at the Funhouse, which he did the year before, which is not a great movie, but you can see a through line from both of those movies to this one.
I like the fact that this movie is plumb in the middle between Texas Chainsaw and Texas Chainsaw 2, because it's, if you look at it from this lens, Texas Chainsaw and Texas Chainsaw 2 are also movies about family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a cannibalistic family.
Yeah.
It's a whole different type of family. It's a little warped out from the Freelings, but I like that. It's a whole different take on family here. But it has that through line as well. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. No, that is interesting. I'll admit I haven't watched Texas Chainsaw 2. I think the only other Texas Chainsaw movies I've seen are the 2003 movie and the 2008, or the movie we talked about earlier this year besides the original. But
the movie we eviscerated, yes.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's and the thing is, there are definitely some Hooper movies after this that I do want to see. I want to see Life Force at some point. I want to see Invader from Mars. I want to see those. And I've heard some wild things about Texas Chainsaw 2, so I'm really kind of curious to see that one at some point.
Speaking about movies that I saw on cable when I was a kid, so I saw the first experience I ever had with that Texas Chainsaw franchise was the Texas Chainsaw 2.
Okay.
Because I remember Wednesday night, it was in the middle of the week, it was a school night, and I should have been to bed, and that came on HBO, and I watched it, and I was like, what the hell did I just watch? It's a whole different world, because they take the basic family, and it's, instead of going straight, because Hooper had exactly the right approach on this. Instead of just making another, like scary, like, visceral, like gutter based, low brow, horror flick, he went the exact opposite, made a black comedy, and it is brilliant black comedy.
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, so the feeling, the fact that nobody dies in a horror movie directed by Tobe Hooper, that's impressive.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, it's like you and I kind of had a discussion about how, how people, or I brought up the fact that it's like, I kind of jokingly brought up the fact that, maybe the fact that they are trying to kill a dog in the opening scene of the thing is part of the reason why audiences were kind of turned off by that, because of the fact that there's obviously that trope of, if you kill the dog in a movie, you've lost the audience. I wonder if that was, obviously it had to be a conscious decision on Spielberg's part. It's like, nobody in this family can die. Like, we cannot have anybody in this family die because of the fact that you lose your audience at that point. And honestly, it's a great call because of the fact that, you get the kids out of the way because of the fact that it's like, you don't want to see them hurt. This ultimately comes down to the parents trying to take care of their own, and especially with Carol Ann. And, it's just such a great choice to do that while also, keeping the stakes in this movie really high because of the fact that, even if you don't have you have these emotional stakes, and that is so important and something that a lot of horror filmmakers really lose sight of, that you really should have some emotional stakes with characters. Now, it's like, I'll admit, and we've had this discussion, there are some where I don't really care. Like we talked about the 2009 Friday the 13th, and one of the things I liked about that was the fact that, you just are waiting for Jason to kill so many of these characters, but it's working off of a different principle than this is. And I think in this case, being able to ground it in, okay, this family will be okay, but we're going to put them through hell first.
Well, I mean, that's part of the thing that I've never understood. Like, I know plenty of friends of mine who are horror fans, and they all they want to see is the kills.
Yeah.
They're coming in to see bodies get shredded, Me, coming from a literary background and coming from, a place where, and I, as a writer also, someone who's been writing since I was basically old enough to pick up a pen, I don't understand the whole thing of having these cardboard characters.
Yeah.
Like, I can't invest in a movie where the characters are so paper thin that if you turn them sideways, you wouldn't see them,
Mm-hmm.
I can't get into that. And I think that what you mentioned is great, because balancing the creepy stuff, you have some really nice stuff in there. You have the stuff where, there's one point where they're all sitting around and it's at night and the lights are down and Robbie's asking about, what's on the other side, why the ghosts are there and all that. And I don't remember I think Beatrice Straight, the redhead, is the one who gives them the thing about it. She gives them this whole thing about it, and she tries to make it sound comforting.
Yeah.
You get that. You get scenes like that in this movie. You get, basically, you get scenes like that. You get, Greg T. Nelson has a great reaction, because Zelda Rubinstein's character at one point says, all right, I need to know which one of you is the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
Because, you need to be stern with her here. And, basically, the mother said, oh, well, I don't really do the punishments here. And Craig T. Nelson's character says, well, wait a second, I'm not the bad guy,
Yeah, his natural reaction is, oh, why are you throwing me under the bus?
It's a very human response. That's the kind of thing that you don't normally get in horror movies. Like, a lot of horror writers just don't care about investing in those type characters. That's a very small thing. It's one quick exchange, but that tells you a lot about, how he feels about the family. Hey, I don't want to be the bad guy. I love Caroline just as much as you do,
Yeah. And Zelda Rubinstein is just absolutely fantastic in this movie. The way that she just comes in, and all of a sudden it becomes kind of a movie within a movie when her character comes in. It's like, okay, so Dr. Lesh is, when she has to go to Rubinstein's character, it's like, that their things need to be, taken to another level.
Yeah,
and
because Dr. Lesh basically says, hey, this is well beyond our scope. We're not going to be able to help you, but I have somebody who I think can.
Mm-hmm.
And even that, when she shows up and Craig T. Nelson he whispers like he's going to fool her and she catches him.
Yeah.
Like, that's another little great exchange,
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely terrific. And this is a score by Jerry Goldsmith. And it's interesting because of the fact that, like, you and I have talked about our appreciation of Goldsmith when we were talking about The Omen. I love that this very much is a Goldsmith score in a lot of ways, but it's interesting that there are a lot of times where it really did kind of remind me of John Williams too, almost to the point where it's Like, I wonder if this was a case where it's like Spielberg would probably want John Williams to score this, but because of E.T., it's like, okay, I'm going to have to get somebody else. Oh, I'll get Goldsmith. And Goldsmith does a tremendous job in this film.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I don't think I've ever come across a Goldsmith score that I didn't appreciate and love. He's just, well, we've talked about this before too. This is, I think, the same year, if not within a year or two, that he's doing the score for Rambo. You couldn't get two films that were more far apart than Poltergeist and Rambo, and he does a knockdown job on both scores because that's just what he is,
Yeah. I also, one of the things I also like is the fact that it's like the supernatural aspect of this is not just about terror. Like, you have the moments in the kitchen where they're able to slide across the kitchen floor, and it's like, oh, it's playful, it's fun. You kind of know in the back of your head, it's like, okay, this is not going to be fun coming up. But at the same time, you have that moment in that scene where it's like, oh, it's fun, and they're enjoying it, but at the same time, you just know, oh, this is only going to get worse before it gets better.
I wonder how many people rolled into this film in '82, the summer of '82, not knowing what the word poltergeist meant, and knowing that this was a Steven Spielberg project, and seeing the first half hour of this film, and then not knowing what was coming and what they were getting into with the rest of this, with the horror story.
Oh, I would imagine a ton. This movie,
oh, yeah.
This movie sets up we've talked about this. This movie sets up. There's a lot of chilling stuff at the beginning, especially with Carol Ann at the end of the broadcast day, which is always kind of creepy when it comes up in movies. But at the same time, it sets the bait on the family dynamic and the suburban life so well that once you get to the horror, it's like, oh shit, that's right, this is a horror movie. Yeah, that's right. I forgot the image of her in front of the TV and saying they're here. I forgot this was supposed to be a horror movie. But
it's very easy to think that people would slide into this and kind of forget that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden in the middle of it, wham.
Yeah.
Because when it hits hard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The third act is as epic a horror sequence as I think just about anybody's ever put on screen in this movie. And it's one of those things where it's like, everything's calmed down, everything's relaxed, it's like the evil's gone, all of that stuff. Yeah, okay, you still have another 20 minutes. You're not out of the woods just yet.
That was the one thing that always annoyed me about Zelda's character in this. And she says, this house is clean. Yeah, she's wrong.
Well, she's also saying it with a creepy voice that we probably should have known better.
Yes. she says this house is clean, and then the feeling's like, okay, we're moving anyway. We just need to be here one more day, and then zonk, boom.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because of the fact that it's like, it's all based, and one of the things is there's very subtle commentary here about commerce versus morality and capitalism versus morality. And, this is basically like a business. This is basically a community that a business is creating for its workers, is what they're moving into.
Yes.
And, you have that scene where it's like they're outside the graveyard. It's like, oh, we had to, we had to dig up the graves and move them and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, we find out that wasn't exactly true. But it really is great, very subtle use of social commentary by the writers in this movie to just layer that in as a big part of it. And I wonder if part of that was kind of because I mean, you have the scene in The Shining where it's like, oh yeah, I think this was built on Indian burial ground or something like that, for the Overlook, and it's like, yeah, I mean, we saw what happened in the Overlook. That shouldn't you realize that that's probably not the thing you need to do?
Well, it's also about it's this weird underbelly look at the American dream.
Yeah.
Because if you looked at the Freelings, okay, successful husband, right? Mother doesn't need to have a job at that time when a lot of couples are working too. Husband and wife are both working. She can stay home with the kids and cook and be a mother.
Right.
You have a beautiful house in a cookie cutter, beautiful neighborhood.
Yeah.
In California.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get any better than that. Oh, wait, it gets a lot worse because you're on top of graves.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've always seen it. Well, when I became a little more advanced in my thinking and understanding, I've seen it since then as this is a critique of that American dream. This is a critique of, hey, you know what? We all want that 3 kids and the Honda, the car in the drive, 2 cars in the driveway, the successful parents and all that, tight family unit. But you dig a little deep under that might not be exactly what you think it is.
Well, I think it's one of the things that's kind of interesting with Spielberg at times because of the fact that, I mean, he's somebody who, on the surface, you look at his films, he kind of celebrates families, celebrates, suburban life and just regular life, but there's always something kind of pulling on it and creating tension within it. And I mean, that's you look at the 2 movies he had out in this month. You think about Poltergeist, you think about E.T., where it's like they're both doing that in their own ways. And I think that's really fascinating the way he does that with genre.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when you put E.T. and Poltergeist side by side. The Elliot's family could be living a village over from what's going on in Poltergeist.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I mean, he could practically be the freaking Freelings next to a neighbor.
Yeah.
That's a much brighter. And even then, though, they don't make a big point of it in. But the fact that Dee Wallace is a single mother, she's a divorcee, she's got 3 kids, and she's running a household where, she's obviously a little oblivious because she doesn't know there's an alien in the house. But other than that, she's doing the best to hold things together. And that's another side of the human condition and the American dream and the family unit in America,
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I mean, this is one of the first real times we've discussed Spielberg on the podcast because of the fact that he, and it's partially because of the fact that I just there hasn't really been a moment for me to really start to talk about him. But I mean, I think Poltergeist is even though, yes, Tobe Hooper directed this, he did a phenomenal job. Spielberg is so much a part of this movie, and the fact that the ways in which he looks at suburban life is so much a part of this movie. You're absolutely right. Like, the family in E.T. and the Freelings could very easily be next door neighbors. That is how close in creating the suburban life that these films are. And it's a wonderful way into that discussion because of the fact that we're looking at this time we're looking at a filmmaker who has had some of the greatest hits of all time and would have another one the next week when this one came out because E.T. came out a week after this. And he was somebody who was really dealing in genres and dealing with genres in terms of how to portray normal family life in a way that people would want to see in an interesting way beyond just doing domestic dramas. And it's interesting that his next film is going to be a personal film about his personal life, and it makes it kind of fitting that in this era, this is the first time we're kind of talking about him, and sort of what inspired him at that age compared to how he reflects on his life now.
Sure. I mean, and obviously your perspective, is cumulative and it grows, your life experience grows, and you're not the same person at 70 that you were at 40, that you were at 20. But I think that this summer of 82 catches Steven Spielberg at a sweet spot in not only his life, but in his professional life as well.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think that Poltergeist, next level stuff, I saw it in 82. I cannot believe that this, just from the fact that you'd think they'd be competing against each other, I can't believe they released this and then a week later released E.T. Like, those films, if you're a Spielberg fan and you only got one and you go to one, those movies are going to be competing against each other, which I don't think they would do today.
Oh God, no. Well, I mean, I was going to agree with you, and then it occurred to me like 10 years ago, Spielberg had Adventures of Tintin and Warhorse out at the same time. So, I mean, but yeah, I mean, those are kind of very different things. But yeah, I mean, it's wild to consider that this was out at the same time as E.T. I mean, granted, they're different studios. This is an MGM release, but versus Universal. But at the same time, the fact that Spielberg had these two out at the exact same time is just, it's breathtaking, and kind of was the same thing a few years later when he had Temple of Doom and Gremlins out around the same time.
The closest I can come with a recent example, and this is nowhere, don't think I'm trying to put this on the level of Spielberg. I remember that Eli Roth's Green Inferno and that Knock Knock flick with Keanu Reeves and Ana de Armas there, released within a couple weeks of each other, which I thought was very weird at the time. It's just like, even if you're in different studios and whatnot, I don't think I would. If I'm running either one of those studios, I don't want to put Spielberg against Spielberg.
Yeah,
that's just me though. I'm not a mega $1 million studio exec, but anyway, we can definitely call 82 the summer of Spielberg, I would say.
Well, seeing as though that E.T. became the highest grossing movie of all time until
yes.
Like basically 96, or really, I mean, Jurassic Park, but I mean, like, really until like Titanic and the Star Wars Special Edition. Yeah, I think it's a fair thing to say. But we've spent plenty of time on Poltergeist. If you haven't seen it in a while, I don't remember if I saw this in theater. I know I wouldn't have. They wouldn't. My mom would probably not have taken me to see it in theaters, but I can't remember if I saw it when I was a kid or not. May have been too intense, but it was PG also. It's entirely possible I did. But I do know that I saw our last film we're going to talk about as a kid, and I have very fond memories of it. It is George A. Romero's Creepshow. And I still have the comic book adaptation
the Creepshow comic.
of
Nice.
Creepshow. And that was very exciting to find when I was going through stuff last year. It's like, I knew I had that somewhere. So yeah, Creepshow is based on, it's a screenplay by Stephen King, who is adapting a couple of his stories, but also creating some original ones. And it's basically an anthology. And this is from George Romero, who did Night of the Living Dead and all of those movies in that franchise. And we decided to do this one last because honestly, it's just a ton of fun. And we wanted to end on a fun note. And I know I saw this one. My mom was a big Stephen King fan. So this is one that I think she was. And the fact of the matter is, it really isn't overtly really intensely violent, which I think is another reason I got away with watching it. But it's I think so much of it is the tone, the fact that this is such a like wicked dark comedy take on horror is what makes this timeless.
So this actually has a connection back to Tobe Hooper, and I want to talk about that real quick first. So Stephen King originally he'd seen George Romero's film Martin. And Martin is a brilliant little film that, a lot of people have either never seen or forgotten about. It's about a kid who is very confused. He lives in Braddock, PA. The town's falling apart, and he thinks he's a vampire, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this debate back and forth on whether he actually is or not. I'll leave that to the viewing audience. But Stephen King was so impressed when he saw Martin that he wanted George Romero to direct Salem's Lot. So the thing is, George Romero was slotted to direct it, and then they decided, because it was such a big novel, so many things going on, so many characters and whatnot, that they wanted to do it for their TV production instead of a film. So at that point, George Romero, all about gore, said, listen, I really can't. He said, it was great because my film is about a vampire with a small town. Stephen King's novel is about a vampire with a small town. Great connection there. So that was, and then once they decided to make a TV, he bowed out and it went to Tobe Hooper. Mm-hmm. And there's no debate that Tobe Hooper directed Salem's Lot, by the way. So that's good. Yeah. But the thing is that they had established a connection. So in 81, I'm going to say Night Riders came out in 81. Night Riders is this really weird, really long Romero film about these guys who are basically, they're Renaissance actors, like at Renaissance fairs. They're a traveling Renaissance act, but they do jousting on motorcycles. And It's a really cool thing. And then it's about power struggles. We don't really need to go over what it's about. But Stephen King, gets a cameo in that. He's sitting next to his wife eating a sandwich, and he's basically being, your typical slob American. I want to see the action. What's going on here? So when 82 rolls around, that's when you get Creepshow. I've always found Creepshow fascinating because George Romero's thing has always been to do social commentary in his films. So this isn't really social commentary here, but it is commentary on the human condition because basically Stephen King and George Romero put in what would have been one of the old anthologies from the 70s, Tales from the Crypt and Tales from the Dark Side and Vault of Horror and all those sorts of things that Hammer and Amicus films were putting out. And I think it's really cool because it's not social commentary here, but it's commentary on the human condition. And basically, this is one of those deals where everyone gets their just desserts at the end. And you want to talk about something where there aren't many happy endings, even though it's a fun tone here. This is certainly the movie for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, nobody comes out well in this movie, but you know what? To a certain extent, you like you said, they get their just desserts. It's like this is very much inspired by the EC Comics anthologies. You mentioned Tales from the Crypt. I mean, anthologies are kind of interesting because of the fact that you're dealing with multiple stories, and you have to figure out a way to sort of tie them into one another. In this case, they use the structure of a kid with a comic book. And that's basically the start. And the father, played by Tom Atkins, is like, "Oh, this will rot your brain. And he throws away the comic book, and the kid is upset. And so he throws away the comic book. It's out by the trash, and the comic book basically turns to these different stories. And the first one is Father's Day, which is...
Well, before we get that real quick, though, okay, so first off, Tom Atkins, star of Season of the Witch, Halloween 3. Let's not forget that.
Yes, of course.
But also, Tom Atkins is an abusive prick to both his kid and his wife in this. So it's not just the stories from the Creepshow where you're going to get a comeuppance.
Yeah. No, exactly.
And I love he has that line where he says, because the wife is saying, "Oh, you don't have to be so mean to him. You don't have to hit him." And he says, "That's why God invented fathers."
Wow.
What
Yeah.
a prick.
And the first one is Father's Day, which is has a mood I put in my notes of dark humor and rich assholery, where we see we get a rich family that is celebrating Father's Day, which with their Aunt Bedelia, who supposedly murdered her father, who kept yelling about getting his Father's Day cake. And all these years later, the families gang together for the celebration, and well, father's coming home to to get what he wants in terms of his cake.
So here's the thing. I normally don't like films where everyone's an asshole because it's hard to root for anybody in those. And I think that, I don't really feel any sympathy for the father here because he's a nasty prick. And all he does is, from what we see of him anyway, we see very little of him in the human life.
Yeah.
We get to see of him after he comes up as a reanimated corpse. But you get the side characters because Warren Shook, I think, plays, I don't know if he's one of the relatives or not, but I think Ed Harris is married into this family, right? Isn't that the deal with him?
Yeah, he's married into his family.
So he's supposed to be your vantage point here. You're seeing things from his point of view because he's brand new to this family just like we are. So, I shouldn't, but I kind of feel bad for Bedelia here because, I'm not for murdering old people, but I could see where somebody would snap given the human condition. But yeah, nothing goes unpunished in this.
Yeah.
Except for Ed Harris's awesome dance moves, which are right on par with my boy Glover, Crispin Glover from Friday the 13th Part 4.
Yeah.
Because what's cool is you have the awesome dance moves of the 80s in horror movies.
And we should mention, not only is it Ed Harris dancing, it is Ed Harris with a full head of hair dancing.
Oh my God, yes.
When was the last time you ever saw Ed Harris with a full head of hair?
Probably 1982.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say his dance skill was unpunished because even he gets killed.
He's the first one after Aunt Bedelia.
Because Bedelia goes to the tombstone to hang out, and she's regretful, and she's talking to her prick father and all that. And then Ed Harris goes out there later, ends up lying down, and boom, tombstone's going to crush him.
Yep.
One of the things I very much like about this is that John Amplas, who was in a whole bunch of Romero movies, plays the zombie version of the father here.
Yeah.
I interviewed John Amplas a couple times back in the day when I was doing conventions. Really sweet guy, really nice guy, and really talented actor. So I'm always happy to see him and show up in a Romero film.
Yeah, the thing that's great about these performances is that they're all fitting the actors. It's one of those things where it's like, for a horror anthology, I'm not sure how much you want to say, oh, there are some great performances. There are some actual great performances in this movie, and we'll get to some of them. But I do love how everybody gets the tone of this movie. And I love the comic book tone of the visuals in this movie. The use of
my God,
color.
they're the best. The lighting from behind where it looks like it's, and you see the little white halo around them and the red lighting and the green. It's great.
Yeah.
It's because it really, I know Ang Lee tried some of this with his Hulk film, but the way that Romero did it here, it really looks like comic book panels at points.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what he's going for, and it's just terrific. And it's always at the moment where, you know, the ultimate comeuppance are getting delivered, that you see that. You don't necessarily see that with just the regular kills. It's always the ultimate moment where it's like the big reveal at the end, that you get those panels from a comic book, and it's terrific. I love the music in this by John Harrison. He does great work throughout this this movie. I mean, I think some of my favorites of his are coming up later. But yeah, Father's Day, you know, Father's Day is a fun way into this world. It really captures, you know, it really gets the tone that you're going to be getting throughout here. Next up, though, is the Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. King himself plays Jordy Verrill, who's a redneck farmer who has a meteor land on his property. And one of the things that's so hilarious about this, watching it as an adult, is his ideas of what striking it rich with a meteor would be. It's like, oh, $200, that'll do it. It's like, yeah, you could probably go up a little bit and think that would be good. But, you know, things don't really turn out the way you would want them to for Jordy Verrill.
It's great when you see his vision of things. He's at first, I don't know if it's a doctor or a professor or whatever. The guy's like, Jordy, you're a genius. And then the thing cracks. And he's like, Jordy, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I think it's perfect that Stephen King is the character, plays Jordy Verrill here, because this is definitely Stephen King poking fun of himself. And probably the image that hey, this guy is this chain-smoking geek up in Maine, you know?
Yeah.
He's this real weirdo here. And he's definitely playing into that. And I think it's not a great performance by any means, but man, is it a lot of fun.
Oh, it's a ton of fun. It's a completely idiotic story, but it's a ton of fun. And I love how it's essentially always stays on his perspective, and the fact that even you basically see as he's basically transforming, you basically see that it doesn't really change him, and you have this weird moment where he's looking in the bathroom mirror and he's seeing his father, and you have this moment with him, and it's like, this is such a weird, silly story, but it's really just gets to how ludicrous some of this is. And
but the surprising thing is, if you look at this story is very Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
It's like Lovecraft for dunces, but yeah, it's Lovecraftian. I think Stephen King was self-aware enough to know that. Hey, listen, I'm gonna put together a Lovecraft type story with stuff falling out of the sky and weeds growing all over everything and consequences, but I'm gonna make it the silliest, funniest thing you've ever seen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's essentially Color Out of Space. I mean, that's essentially what it is.
Yeah, with Stephen King in overalls.
The difference is, if you're thinking of the Nicolas Cage movie from Color Out of Space, you don't get him greatly talking about alpacas in that movie. You did in that movie. Instead you get Stephen King basically self-loathing for like 5 to 7 minutes, because after that meteor cracks, because of the fact that he basically kind of screws things up. And it's now, there's not a lot to say about this. It's such a silly story, but I do love the visuals and seeing him transform. And to where at the end, when he basically looks like Cousin It from the Addams Family, except made out of leaves instead of hair.
Yes. Again, like I understand that a lot of mean stuff happens to good people in life, but I always felt bad for Geordie here, even worse than for Bedelia. At least Bedelia, she was on the wrong. But Geordie here is just a simple country bumpkin. And, he goes out and, he's just a simple guy who wants to have a happy little life. And every time that shotgun goes off, it's like, oh, man,
Yeah.
that's rough. But again, there's no other way out. There's no way. He's painted himself into a vegetable corner there, and there's no way out. So
yeah,
it's funny because George Romero is considered a very progressive director, and I remember reading. So I don't remember if it was by him or someone commenting on one of his Dead films, saying, "Well, it's progressive, but is it really progressive? Because what's it progressing toward? You know?" So it's like if you look at Jordy Verrill through that, and you could say it's a very nihilistic little film. I choose to just look at it as, hey, this is a fun romp, man.
Yeah.
Stephen King's having a ball here. He's playing an outsized version of what people might think he is, and he's having fun with it. Romero's having fun, and I just take it as that. But there is that other way to look at it. So I always find that interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to the third story, which is Something to Tide You Over, which for a while is one of my lasting memories of this. It basically has Leslie Nielsen as a husband who's approaching his wife's lover, played by Ted Danson, and we see the evolution of that. We see what he does to get revenge on his wife and her lover, and the way that turns out. And this is it's kind of funny because of the fact that by this point we've seen Leslie Nielsen in Airplane. So we've seen the silly side that he's going to essentially play for the rest of his life. But one of the things I think is so interesting about this is that you still completely believe him in this role. This is, now granted, it's dark humor, but at the same point, we also see the sinister in this character. And that's one of the things that makes this one work so beautifully.
Well, people who grew up in the 80s and their first experience with him is either Airplane or the Naked Gun movies, don't even realize that he had a whole long-standing career as a serious actor.
Yeah.
And if you ever want to see him play a total unlikable prick that's the exact opposite of Frank Drebin, watch the movie Day of the Animals, which is an absolute prick. But the thing is that, he's very upset. Because, again, I'm going to talk about something else in a second here, but he's very upset because he's a wealthy guy, views his wife as a possession, and here's someone who's stepped in and taken his position. So what's he going to do? He's going to basically bury his wife and Ted Danson in the sand, and he's going to leave the shore to take care of it.
Yeah.
Now, the funny thing is, and I mentioned this to you the other day, for anyone who's ever seen Cat's Eye, the middle story in Cat's Eye, which is based on one of King's short stories called The Ledge, is the same exact story.
Yeah.
It's a different circumstance because it takes place up high on a high-rise. It's a rich guy who's upset that some tennis pro is sleeping with his wife. He's going to exact his revenge by making the character, this young tennis pro, walk along a ledge on the end, all the way around the building, and as he's going, he's going to dump water on him and blow horns and try to get him to fall off.
Yeah.
So the basic premise is exactly the same premise.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's done really well in both movies. I think I like it better here because I love zombies. So,
well,
but it's also interesting, as I mentioned the other day, that 2 of these 5 tales involve zombies.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that this is George A. Romero, and these are not your standard issue Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead zombies.
No.
In fact, story, the two types of zombies within this anthology. The two types of story of zombies are different. So I always find it interesting when he takes on zombies, but he's outside the dead anthology, the dead franchise there. And I like what he does here. Well, we'll talk about the teleporting and the seaweed and all that in a minute, I guess. But what else would you like to say about this?
Oh yeah, I mean, I love there are some shots in here when he's buried Ted Danson alive. You see kind of the point of view shots of Danson seeing the tide come in, and I love those shots. I mean, I know it's very simple. Just you put the camera down down on the sand as the tides comes in, but I love that point of view shot. It really leads into the terror of what we're seeing. And I mean, as fun as these segments are, right, they also do lean into, they're still horror, so they're still creeping you out. And it's interesting here. I think it's kind of interesting here, the TV is such an important part. We didn't really talk about it. The TV is such an important part of Poltergeist, and the fact that is where,
it's the conduit.
It's the conduit to the other world. Here, Leslie Nielsen uses it as a torture device for Danson and his wife to basically watch each other, so he can watch them drowned. And it's really that's one of the things that always lasted with me, is the way that he builds that slow burn into seeing how we get to see how the tide comes in, and then he's showing Danson the video of her, which I have no idea how that sets up, but there are a lot of things in this one that don't make a lot of sense in terms of the drowning, but okay. But yeah, this is and then the way that this turns, it's a very natural turn, but I love the sep and the delivery on this one.
I'm pretty sure that there's a scene with Danson when he's buried where a crab goes by, isn't there?
Yeah.
See, that's a nice touch.
Yeah.
I gotta admit, out of the 5 stories that we have here, this is the one that's really frightening on a primal level, because, the idea of being buried from the neck down and still alive and waiting for the shore to come in and drown me is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. No, and then, and then the way that as unbelievable as some of the images are, it's like, I do love that image of Ted Danson. He's still buried, but he's underneath the water, and it's just a straight on shot. It's just such a great shot.
And the thing is that Leslie Nielsen's character, if he wanted to, could just have picked up a gun and shot Ted Danson's character.
Oh yeah,
the same thing with his wife.
Yeah.
But no, this is about torturing them, and this is about lingering in it. And this is about taking joy in watching them be tortured. His character, again, is such a prick.
Yeah.
But then we get to the comeuppance.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the comeuppance, Brian.
So the comeuppance is basically he goes to get the equipment, and I mean, I don't know what good it does him now, because you would think it's all destroyed by the water. And he takes it back, and he's like, "Oh, well, where he must have been pulled out to sea," which, okay. And then basically he's relaxing in his house, and then the zombies of the seaweed covered zombies of Danson and his wife come in for the and basically say the final thing that and basically do the same thing to Leslie Nielsen that he did to them. And it's a goofy ending, but it is such a terrific ending. I
love the voice effects on them after they get zombified. The voice effects are cool.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to go here pretty soon. So, and I hate it because of the fact that we're coming up on my favor of this episode. But I do want to this movie. So we're gonna speed through these last two, starting with.
Go right ahead.
Hmm?
Go right ahead.
Starting with The Crate, which stars Hal Holbrook is Henry, who's a college professor who basically who's basically beaten down by his wife Billy, played by Adrienne Barbeau. A friend of his goes to investigate a crate that a janitor has found underneath the stairs, and turns out has a monster in it. And so, a couple people die. Henry sees a way to maybe get rid of his wife, and that's essentially all there is to it. Fluffy is one of the iconic creatures in movie history. We haven't really talked about Tom Savini, but his makeup effects are just phenomenal in this movie.
Fluffy's great. Yeah, absolutely. Fluffy's kind of like the standard bearer for this flick when you think about it, as far as monsters go. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this is such a I love the dark comedy. Holbrook's basically a sociopath in this, and it's kind of great to see him in that mode where it's like you kind of empathize with him, but because of Billy, but at the same time you see what he does and how he is going to cover up for Dexter, and it's like, oh yeah, this guy could totally be a serial killer if he just had the motivation for it.
Sure, and then we get to my least favorite of all of the episodes, the bug one at the end.
Yeah. But to finish up with The Crate, I love Adrienne Barbeau in this. She is so wonderfully insufferable in here, and when he finally gets her down to the crate, it's just one of the great moments. I love the way Romero directs it. I love the ending. I love this use of storytelling to tell Dex, oh hey, here's what happened, and all of this stuff, and it's like, oh well, maybe it's not as simple as that. Thanks. I wouldn't mind seeing a sequel to this where Fluffy gets out and kind of reigns terror again. But yeah, the fifth one is the one I'll be honest, like you and I kind of agree that this is probably our least favorite, and they're creeping up on you, which stars E.G. Marshall, who's a billionaire who's locked away in a germ-proof room in an apartment complex, and he's afraid of cockroaches, and there are cockroaches all over the place, and it is creepy because of the fact that cockroaches are in real life creepy. This is one that, yeah, I always kind of forget that this one is after The Crate, because of the fact that The Crate is just so memorable. I always forget that this one exists to a certain extent because it's not my favorite. I mean, you basically want to see him get his comeuppance is basically where we're at with this story.
The best thing I could say about this, briefly and succinctly, is I can shut Creepshow off after The Crate, and I don't feel like I'm missing anything.
Yeah. I mean, E.G. Marshall was very good in this. I enjoy E.G. Marshall. I enjoy the different, some of the, broader aspects of this. But yeah, it's one that it goes on a little too long, and it just is not something that interests me in the long run. So I mean, it's kind of hard for me to get interest in this one. But and then we do see Tom Savini. He plays a garbage man at the end who picks up the comic book, and he's always a fun presence on screen. And then we see the comeuppance with Tom Atkins' character when we see the son has gotten the voodoo doll, and that's Creepshow. I hate to rush this, but the fact of the matter is, it's like Creepshow is a ton of fun. I always love talking about Creepshow, and I always love thinking about it. I always love watching it. It's one that is probably the horror movie from my youth that I genuinely love the most. I mean, there are others that I enjoy, but this is one that is just fun to put on. It's just that right amount of terror, entertainment, and just good fun. And I love that we put the. I mean, we're talking about 1982 horror. These three really are the top of the heap, I think.
I agree. And I think that if you wanted to watch a Romero film that's just as well made as his other stuff, but not quite as gloomy and dreary, and you want to have fun with it, you want to see Stephen King having a ball with writing things, and you want to see an update on an EC Comics anthology, you can't go better than Creepshow.
No,
it's
you
a
can't.
Great film. I watch it every time I come across it. And it is a great way for us to end our discussion today. And on that note, I want to say thank you so much for having me on as always, Brian.
Oh,
always a pleasure.
It's always great to talk to you, and we'll get back to pretty terrible horror movies coming up. I'm glad we were able to talk about some pretty great ones today.
I am too. Thank you so much, Brian.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to thank Phil for joining me today, and it's always great to talk horror with him, especially horror like this. I thank you for listening, as always, to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. Check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There's going to be a lot coming up in the end of the year. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to these discussions. This has been a great run we're on, and it's going to stay that way for the rest of the year. That's it for me. Thank you very much, and check us out at www.sonic-cinema.com.